News 2 presents To the Point.
First point, the candidates for governor both making last-minute campaign stops across the state. I had a chance to speak face-to-face with Governor Henry McMaster and challenger Joe Cunningham in the weeks leading up to Election Day. Second point, South Carolina's first congressional district has been rezoned, and now there's a battle for who will represent a major part of the Lowcountry. Congresswoman Nancy Mace versus Dr. Annie Andrews. We break down that race. Third point, education on the ballot. The future of your children's learning could be at stake on Tuesday. We'll tell you what you need to know on both a state and local level. Good morning and welcome to a special edition of To the Point. This is the show where we break down the political issues and elections that matter to you. Thank you so much for joining us for a live hour-long edition of the show. I'm Riley Benson. News 2 is your local election headquarters. One of the biggest races that South Carolinians are keeping their eyes on this year is the race for governor. Incumbent Republican Governor Henry McMaster is facing off against Democratic challenger Joe Cunningham. I had a chance to speak with both candidates in the weeks leading up to an election. Let's start with a conversation I had with Governor McMaster at an event he held at the Citadel last Wednesday.
This is a grand event here. This coincides with our coalition of veterans. General James Livingston was here, Major General, who is a recipient of the Medal of Honor, and we're delighted to have that endorsement. This is a veterans state, 8 major military bases, a major military tradition. They are a great part of our state. And also that goes right along with our recent endorsement by over 70% of the solicitors and sheriffs in the state. So those two endorsements are particularly important because our military and our law enforcement have their feet on the ground and know what's important. And we're very pleased to have that endorsement. The campaign's going well. We're meeting a lot of people. A lot of new people have moved to the state that we're meeting in all over the state. But we're growing. As I mentioned, over $5 billion in new capital investment just this year. And we're just 10 months into the year. There's going to be more. And that's just a sign, as well as the budget surpluses and all the great things that are happening. It's just a sign that South Carolina's on the way up. So we're in great shape. We've had to fight with the Biden administration, as you know, on some unconstitutional mandates, but we've overcome that, and the door is wide open to great prosperity for all of our people.
Well, Governor, you look at the economy, gas prices are up, cost of food's up, housing's up. How do we get that on track in South Carolina and give some relief to South Carolinians?
Well, what we're doing is we're working. We're putting our people to work. We're providing more scholarships than we've ever had. In the 4-year schools, we've quadrupled the millions of dollars that are available for scholarships. We have $79 million available for scholarships to the technical colleges, and we have the best technical colleges in the whole world. No child will be denied 4-year kindergarten in South Carolina, no matter whether they have the money or not, because we've set aside money for that as well. We're about finished deepening the port. It'll be the deepest on the Atlantic coast. We're ahead of schedule now in our projections with a budget surplus. We're able to put more money into the roads. We're putting $2 billion into the roads, and it's running ahead of that. Enabled us to speed the schedule up. I've mentioned I think it's about $5.3 billion in new capital investment in just 10 months is just astounding. That's a record for the state. So we're doing our part to keep our people safe, get them educated, trained, and get them to work. Now, the Biden administration is not helping us a bit with shutting down the oil and gas and all that, and this inflation. Everything is just too expensive. People can't afford it. We're doing our part here, and we think that this election will be a watershed election. We think that there'll be a lot of Republicans elected around the country that will be able to stop a lot of I think, harmful things that are happening in the Congress.
Governor, obviously state legislators are talking about an abortion ban in South Carolina. What do you think is the best play for that moving forward in our state?
Well, I have asked them to take their time, don't hurry, don't slow it down, don't speed it up. A lot of people have a lot of information, a lot of experience, a lot of opinions, but we've had two bills, two laws so far. I presided over the pain-capable law when I was Lieutenant Governor presiding over the Senate. I presided over that, and that had the 4 standard exceptions in it that most South Carolinians, it seems to me, are comfortable with some or all of those. And I signed the heartbeat bill, and that also has the 4 exceptions in it that many people think are appropriate. But this is a question for the General Assembly, and I believe that they will produce a bill, I don't know when, that they will produce a bill that will meet the approval of the great majority of the people in the state.
Last question.
Governor, infrastructure and flooding resiliency is big in the state, but certainly big in Charleston. I mean, how do we continue to protect Charleston, protect the Lowcountry, protect the state when it comes to infrastructure and flooding?
Well, we created several new offices during our tenure. One was the Veterans Affairs Agency with Major General, Brigadier General Will Grimsley, whose father was the president of the Citadel, by the way, years ago. He's heading that up. The other one is the Office of Resilience, which was based on the Floodwater Commission, which I authorized and commissioned, I think, about 3 years ago. And they had scientists, naturalists, all sorts of experts in water, both salt, wind, rain, river, and everything else, in the ground and above the ground. They made a number of recommendations, and one was to have a cabinet-level agency on resilience to determine what our best plan and course is for water in the state and how to protect ourselves against water, against floods, against hurricanes, and also to protect our natural resources. So that is making great progress, and I think we have the talent in the state with the Department of Natural Resources as well, and others, and a lot of private institutions, to see that our natural resources are protected. And we have to do that. That's why we are interested in some of our barrier islands. As you know, the state has purchased St. Philip's Island from Ted Turner's group. We're protecting Pritchard's Island, which is just north of it. We're also very interested in Wade's Island, which is up just north of Myrtle Beach, south of the border there with North Carolina. And we do, and also Bay Point Island. We're interested in that also down on the Port Royal Sound. But we need to preserve, and our state parks. We're expanding our state park. We want everyone, those people here today, and the children and their children and their children, to be able to experience the natural beauty of our state, and we're working hard to do that.
Governor, thank you.
Guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, when we come back, we'll be hearing from the governor's challenger in Tuesday's race, Democrat Joe Cunningham, when he says he's the best man to lead South Carolina. That's coming up. Welcome into this special edition of To The Point. We're now joined by Joe Cunningham and Tally Casey, 2 candidates for our governor's race in South Carolina. Thank you so much both for joining us today.
Absolutely, Riley. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And Ms. Casey, your first time on To The Point, so if you wouldn't mind just kind of introducing yourself to our viewers today.
Absolutely. My name is Tally Parham Casey. I was born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina. This is my first time running for office. I'm running for lieutenant governor with Joe Cunningham. I was honored to be invited to join this ticket. I'm very interested in the issues that we have going on in South Carolina. I was particularly drawn off the sidelines when the Dodds decision came out on June the 24th, and access to choice is something that's very important to me. So I'm very happy to be here, Riley. Thank you.
And Joe, you've been on the show a couple times, but if you want to introduce yourself to our viewers today.
Yeah, of course. Joe Cunningham, father of a 4.5-year-old, and I got to throw that half in there in case he's watching because he always corrects me. I'm 4.5. Served the Lowcountry for 2 years in Congress. I was honored to have that position, and now running for governor because I want to build a better South Carolina for my son, his generation, and the generations that will follow too.
You know, obviously we're close to Election Day at this point. It's been a heated race between you and current Governor Henry McMaster. So, you know, today's purpose, we want to kind of give you guys the opportunity to talk about your issues, your platform, and give viewers a better idea ahead of Election Day. So, first topic, we're going to go straight into economy. It's something that, you know, continues to affect South Carolinians. You look at inflation, you look at high gas prices, the cost of food going up, all things that we've seen in the last year or two. So my question would be, you know, if you were to be elected governor, what is your plan to kind of attack those, bring that down for South Carolinians, make life more affordable?
Yeah, I mean, South Carolinians are feeling the pinch. You know, I feel it every time I go to the grocery store, every time I fill my tank up with gas. And last year, when prices for gas were skyrocketing, I called on the governor to temporarily suspend the gas tax. It's a simple measure that other governors were doing, Democrats and Republicans. You know, Governor Kemp did it in Georgia, and it's real savings for folks. So these are small measures that can be done, but Governor McMaster refused to do that. And I don't know if it's because I suggested it or not, but it's simple things like that can provide some form of relief. But as we look to building the economy, we have to be building an economy of the future. You know, we've been on our college tour. We're stopping at campuses all across the state. We talked to a lot of young kids who are going to be graduating and looking to go to Charlotte or Atlanta for jobs because the jobs they want don't exist here in South Carolina. And during his State of the State address, Governor McMaster, you know, touted the Walmart jobs that he's bringing in South Carolina. You know, I want the jobs of the future, the jobs that don't just pay, you know, an hourly wage but a salary. And we want to bring you know, new sectors to South Carolina. I want to legalize marijuana, legalize sports betting, take that tax revenue and pay our teachers more and fix our roads. But we got to be looking at the jobs of the future, and we see the potential there. But we just haven't had the vision or the leadership in the governor's office.
Obviously, abortion remains a hot topic in South Carolina. State legislators were talking about it recently as far as the potential ban of abortion in South Carolina. So, you know, under your leadership in South Carolina, what's the best plan for South Carolina, and how do we tackle abortion, and what does that look like under your leadership?
Well, go ahead, Tally.
Well, I just wanted to tag on to your last line of questioning about the economy. I mean, let's start with this being an economic issue. You know, it is restricting abortion access for women in South Carolina, restricting their health care decisions when women make up 50% of the breadwinners or of families in South Carolina. It's just going to make it that much worse, and it's going to create a healthcare crisis, and it's going to affect minority populations even more. And so, you know, and for companies looking to relocate to South Carolina, I mean, how can they be attracted to come here when we're trying to restrict the freedoms of half of their employees? So I think, you know, it's something that we should certainly think of as an economic issue. Joe and I both support access to choice. The precedent that was set by Roe v. Wade, that was the law of the land for the past 50 years, we believe that was the right balance, and certainly don't want our daughters to have less rights than their mothers and grandmothers.
Riley, it's government overreach at its complete worst. And, you know, the core message of Tally and our campaign is we want to give South Carolinians more freedom. We trust women with the freedom to make their own health care decisions. Governor McMaster wants to ban all abortions and have no exceptions for rape, incest, or the life of the mother. He said that. And so the stakes in this election are very clear. You know, if a bill comes across Governor McMaster's desk that bans abortions with no exceptions, he'll sign it. I'll veto it. That's the key difference in this race, and that's what's on the line. Again, I know that Governor McMaster has been a politician for over 40 years, but I guess he must have forgotten about those conservative principles that Republicans usually claim, which is smaller government. And I can't think of a more egregious government overreach than politicians coming into the doctor's offices and women. I just can't. And if politicians can tell a woman what to do with their bodies, I'd ask, like, what can they not do? What could they not do? And so this, I believe, this isn't, look, I have no animosity towards Henry McMaster. This is about a new generation of leadership. This is about new ideas. And this is about freedom. And again, I want to expand the freedoms that South Carolinians have. And with all due respect to Governor McMaster, you know, after over 40 years of being a politician, he hasn't accomplished what he set out to accomplish. He's not going to do it in another 4 years.
You say Governor McMaster has done hardly anything in 40 years. So my question to you, Joe, is President Biden is considering obviously another run for president. He's another politician who's been in the game for 40 years. Would you endorse him for a run for president if he made that decision?
No, I've been very clear on this. Our state and our country needs a new generation of leadership and new vision. And this isn't, like I said, anything personal towards President Biden, but I feel it would be inconsistent and it'd be hypocritical if I were to say Governor McMaster has been serving for 40 plus years and he needs to leave, but not say the same thing about President Biden. And it's not about, it's not about them. It's about the new generation of leadership. We're running a campaign on freedom, giving South Carolinians more freedom and not less. Women the freedom to make their own decisions about their bodies, legalizing marijuana and sports betting, and taking that revenue and paying our teachers more and fixing our roads. I was proud to be ranked one of the most independent members of Congress. I was proud of the fact that I was able to stand up to the leaders of both parties, so as long as that meant standing up for the people of South Carolina. And that's exactly the same independent leader that I'll be as governor. And I'd humbly ask for your support and your vote.
All right, Ms. Casey, thank you for making the drive from Columbia. Joe, thanks for coming back in. Appreciate you guys joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Now we've heard from both candidates in the race for governor. When we come back, I'll be joined by News 2's political analyst John Bersini to break down this pivotal race. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the special edition of To The Point, joined now by John Bersini. And John, obviously, we just had a chance to hear from both the candidates running for governor in South Carolina, current Governor Henry McMaster, challenger Joe Cunningham. So, at this point, we want to kind of break down this race. Obviously, maybe the biggest race in our state this election cycle. So, your initial thoughts on seeing those two interviews, your first time kind of hearing from those two candidates?
So some things that really stand out, Governor McMaster is running a pretty typical traditional Republican campaign, very pro-business, low taxes. He's running on his record. Again, he's been in politics a really long time, and he's basically saying, look at what I've done, and this is more of what I'll deliver moving into the future. Congressman Cunningham, former Congressman Cunningham, an interesting approach. He is running really unapologetically as an independent, as someone who is willing to buck both parties, and as someone who really wants to be a new generation of leader for South Carolina.
John, obviously I think there's some glaring differences in these two candidates. So, obviously let's kind of look at those on some of those issues. We start with maybe economy. And obviously, they both kind of talked about it, what we're seeing in South Carolina. In your mind, what are the biggest differences for these two on this issue?
Again, a lot to unpack there. So again, if you look at what Governor McMaster is saying, again, he wants to bring in new business. He wants to continue to recruit. And from his perspective, that's going to help to bring in new jobs. Congressman Cunningham is basically saying, we don't necessarily want the economy of old. We want the economy of new. We want the new tech jobs. We want to begin to pull people from the Charlottes, from the Atlantas back into South Carolina. So if you look at it from that perspective, again, one's got a very traditional approach, and then one is saying, we need to do better than that. We need to look at what the economy of the future may look like. Another difference, and this actually came out in the Lieutenant Governor, the gubernatorial debate they had. For the first time, Congressman Cunningham's campaign actually said that they support a statewide minimum wage and is setting that wage at $12 an hour. That's something that Governor McMaster has not been in favor of. Certainly Republicans have been in control in South Carolina for a number of years now. If they wanted to act on the minimum wage, they would have. So again, that would be one of the biggest differences that we would see.
Obviously abortion is an issue that it's been talked about, seems for like months now in South Carolina, and these two have very different stances when it comes to abortion. So, kind of let's go through that, and what do you see from the interviews we heard from them speaking about abortion today?
So biggest difference, again, and this is still moving through the General Assembly, that's really who's going to have to act on this. So what this comes down to is what gets to the governor's desk. And right now, it seems like Governor McMaster certainly is for a ban on abortion, a total ban on abortion. And he would sign a bill, even if it did not provide any exceptions for rape, incest, or life of the mother. Congressman Cunningham, based upon his comments, he wants to go back to a more of a Roe versus Wade type scenario, where states can still provide some restrictions on abortion, but again would still grant exceptions for rape, life of the mother, incest, things to that effect as well too. So that would be more of the situation we were in prior to the recent decision by the Supreme Court. So at the end of the day, if reproductive rights are important to you, you're probably going to align more with Congressman Cunningham. If you are strict, abortion, no exceptions, then you probably align more with Governor McMaster.
John, these two have been crisscrossing the state now for the last couple of weeks, trying to get the final push for votes as we head towards Election Day in just 2 days at this point. So, is it surprising to see these two out and about as much as they are kind of these last 2 weeks? What do you think is maybe the reception from voters in South Carolina getting the chance to hear from these two candidates?
So we know polling shows us and results have showed us that a voter is more likely to vote for a candidate if they have met them. Interestingly, whether they agree with them or not, if they get a chance to talk with them and maybe explain some of the issues, again, they're more likely to walk into the ballot box and vote for whomever it may be. So to see candidates, again, in the final push leading up to Election Day trying to meet as many voters as possible, doing as many live events as possible, really isn't surprising. It's part of just the macro campaign strategy.
John, an interesting question I want to ask you. Are there, if any obstacles you could see kind of in the way of either of these two candidates, Governor McMaster or Joe Cunningham, anything that could maybe cause some issues or surprises on Election Day when we look at this race?
So one of the things in regular viewers of To The Point, they hear us talk a lot about political branding. Again, the Republican brand, the Democratic brand. And surprisingly, those in some cases probably help the candidates, but they also might hurt them as well too. If you are a staunch Democrat, that's just the party that you align with, issues don't matter, you're not going to even consider Governor McMaster. On the flip side of that, if you identify as a Republican, if that is your political brand, you're not going to consider voting for Joe Cunningham. So if you're at the Cunningham campaign looking to court those votes, you've got that obstacle that, again, that's just glaring, that helps to drive a lot of individuals to the ballot box.
John, we're about a minute till the next break, so I want to ask you things that voters need to know if they're still making their decision on this race come Tuesday, things that maybe they need to identify or to highlight or that should stand out to them if they're still undecided who they're going to vote for.
So crunch time is coming. You need to make your decision certainly sooner than later. Number one, use good resources when doing your research. Again, I would maybe start with the campaign's websites as far as trying to get a general idea of what their platform looks like, and then go out and try to find reliable resources to either validate or back up their claims, or you might even find some sources that debunk them.
John, obviously this is a very close race in South Carolina. Do you think this will be a close race, I guess is the question. There's been a lot of speculation that it could be one side or the other, but to me, it seems like it could be a close race come Election Day.
So the state has not elected a Democratic governor since 1998. Jim Hodges is the last Democratic governor. Democrats have not won a statewide race in about 16 years here in South Carolina. So certainly Republicans go in with an advantage. With everything that has gone on right now surrounding abortion, Democrats, they did have some momentum going into Tuesday. We'll see how this all plays out. It'll certainly be interesting.
John, certainly will be interesting. That's a wrap on the discussion regarding the governor's race. But don't worry, there's plenty more to come. Dozens of other races we need to tell you about. John and I will be breaking down those when we come back. Hello and welcome back to a special edition of To The Point. This is the show where we break down the political issues in elections that matter to you. Thank you for joining us for a live hour-long edition of the show. I'm Raleigh Benson. Now, so far we've spent a half hour breaking down one of the biggest races in our state, the race for governor. But in this next half hour, we're going to be covering a lot of ground, local low-country races, the U.S. Senate race, the state superintendent race, and more. But let's start with a congressional race that has a lot of eyes on it in our area. Congresswoman Nancy Mace hoping to defend her seat against challenger Dr. Annie Andrews. Now, we've heard a lot from these candidates, including during a debate in this very studio. This week, we caught up with each of them while they're doing their early voting. Take a listen.
There's no reason not to vote this election, and this election is the most important election of our lifetime.
Every election we say this is the most important election of our lifetime, but I truly believe that this is. With what happened this summer with Roe falling, we have to restore women's reproductive freedom, and with what happened on January 6th, we have to protect our democracy.
And John, this is a race that's going to be very important for South Carolinians. We look at Nancy Mace, who's been in Congress for the last 2 years. We look at Dr. Annie Andrews, who's a first-time politician. Your biggest takeaways on these two candidates in the races they've ran over the last year or so.
So again, what's interesting about politics, you can either run on your record or some folks run away from your record. And being a brand new politician, Dr. Annie Andrews, has no record. So her perspective and her opinion on a lot of issues, again, they're going to be fresh. Certainly, Congresswoman Mace, she's been in Congress for 2 years. She had a career in the state legislature. She's got a record that she can either run on or, as we've seen from the Andrews campaign, they can try to use against her. Hot topics again in this race as well too. Abortion certainly still comes in mind. Dr. Andrews brings a unique perspective, actually being a pediatrician, on what abortion means and what outlooks might look like for women throughout South Carolina. Representative Mace also has a very unique perspective. She's openly talked about being a victim of rape in her teenage years. And it really has some, I want to say maybe sympathy or, again, a unique perspective on some of the exceptions that we've heard lawmakers talk about that an abortion bill might include.
These two obviously had that debate in the studio. You and I were in here for that. Those two kind of sparred over a lot of these topics, abortion being one of them that they seem to have, very different opinions on. Economy is another one that, a lot of these candidates, as we're going to talk about, are discussing and the impacts it's having on South Carolinians. Your takeaway on where these two kind of stand on the issues that are maybe most important for South Carolina, in this election?
So what's interesting, again, just what goes back to just Congress in general, again, in the House are one of 435 individuals. So, what they talk about wanting to do in a particular district, again, they've got to get other individuals, behind those efforts as well, too. The 1st Congressional District is interesting. It's not the 7th, and it certainly doesn't look like a lot of the other districts in South Carolina. This is one that Democrats can see a path to victory for Dr. Andrews, and it's one, especially after redistricting, that has been redrawn that really helps to favor Republicans. At the end of the day, though, we've heard both of the candidates talk about how they want to work with either the majority or the minority party, depending on whether they find themselves in Congress, to bring things back to the 1st Congressional District. There's a lot of issues, again, whether it be coastal flooding, whether it be the port, whether it be industry. Again, there are several things that go on here that they would have a key voice in.
John, Nancy Mace won this district by 1% back in 2020, something that's, over Joe Cunningham, so very close. I mean, is that maybe your prediction for how Tuesday could go for these two?
So, again, it's certainly going to be competitive. Again, if you even look back at former Congressman Cunningham's victory, it was tight then as well, too. So we knew the 1st Congressional District was competitive regardless. If we look at all the districts in South Carolina, this is probably the most competitive. Again, Democrats swear they can see a path to victory for Dr. Andrews. It was redrawn to favor Republicans, so we're going to have to look in areas like Cane Bay, Somerville, that were brought into the 1st Congressional District to see how they vote. Again, it should be competitive regardless, but again, if we look at just some of the greater themes going into Election Day, Republicans certainly probably hold a slight advantage here, but Democrats probably have some momentum.
John, it'll be a race that we're going to watch closely on Election night. Now, the seat for the state's top educator is up for grabs this election. We'll break down a debate between the two candidates when we come back. With days to go before Election Day, the leading candidates for State Superintendent of Education made one final pitch to South Carolina voters. Jason Raven breaks down a debate between those candidates last Wednesday and has the latest.
Your child's education front and center on the debate stage Wednesday night. Candidates Democrat Lisa Ellis and Republican Ellen Weaver vying for your vote, both hoping to take the reins at the State Department of Education.
What I have seen through my 22-year experience in the classroom is the fact that what's happening at the policy level is not helping students and teachers.
Talking about the problems is not the same thing as solving them. You have to actually be able to work with the General Assembly, with the governor, with superintendents and parents and educators around the state in order to actually get anything done.
Weaver and Ellis agree. They believe teacher pay needs to increase and agree working conditions need to be addressed.
There are old programs that were passed 30, 40, 50 years ago that maybe were a good idea at the time, but are just no longer relevant to our educational system of the 21st century.
There are things that as superintendent of education I can do and to relieve some of those hoops that teachers have to jump through by looking at, what is in the best interest of students.
When it comes to mental health and school safety, the candidates say the issues go hand in hand. Now, Weaver is a proponent of education savings accounts. Legislation to create this voucher-like program stalled earlier this year.
I want children to be in the environment where they can learn best. And too often, many families face income limitations because of their zip code and just because of their family circumstances.
Ellis says she is against the use of public money to help cover things like private school tuition.
When we talk about vouchers and tax credits, the concern that I continue to have is that there's a lack of transparency and accountability.
Now, the candidates disagreed on whether school board races should be partisan, and they also clashed on whether CRT is being taught and what roles parents play and what materials are in your child's school library.
Students and teachers know that students learn best when they see themselves reflected in the classroom.
These are things that parents have the right to decide, and a school should never come between a parent and a child in these critical decisions.
Now, early voting runs through November 5th, and Election Day is next Tuesday. In Columbia, I'm Jason Raven.
And John, obviously this race is a big one in South Carolina. I mean, let's quickly talk about this. The differences between these two candidates. You know, Lisa Ellis, obviously a current teacher. Ellen Weaver, no real classroom experience, but has worked on the state's education oversight committee. So your biggest differences for these two candidates?
So again, they echoed this earlier. We talked just about vouchers, and this is really one of the biggest differences, if not the biggest difference between the two campaigns. Again, vouchers, whether it be, it's diverting tax dollars to private schools. Ellen Weaver is in favor of that. Thinks that the dollar should follow the child. Lisa Ellis, a public school teacher, basically says that our public tax dollars need to reside within public schools.
John, whoever does win this race has got a couple issues right off the bat they're going to have to deal with. Obviously South Carolina is seeing teachers leave in high numbers. We're seeing one of the highest vacancies when it comes to teachers in our state. Obviously, student safety, school safety is another issue that's high on the radar for parents and across our state. So, there are two opinions on these, and how do you expect them to kind of attack those and where these two fall on that?
So again, well, first of all, so this is a race that Democrats, again, really believe they can win. The last statewide race they won, albeit was by hundreds of votes, was the state superintendent of education. So Lisa Ellis, they believe, is uniquely qualified, again, being a current teacher. She's uniquely qualified to bring a perspective, again, that Republicans just don't have here. Again, many issues to unpack. COVID certainly has exacerbated a lot of the problems that our schools are experiencing. The teacher shortage needs to be addressed with. Teacher pay comes up a lot too, as far as trying to bring South Carolina up to a national average, for example. That's going to take a superintendent to have to get on board and working with the legislature. That's who basically sets those numbers. So having an understanding of how the political dynamics in Columbia work to advance the agenda for the Department of Education certainly would be key as well too.
Working with the state legislators is something that Ellen Weaver really seems to tout, that she has experience, again, working for Jim DeMint, working on the state's education oversight committee. So, what kind of perspectives does that bring to this race, and does that make things maybe more difficult or to help the other candidate?
So certainly for advocating for the department, having a fundamental understanding of how politics works in Columbia would be an advantage. One of the advantages, again, that Lisa Ellis is going to have is she understands what it's like to be a classroom teacher. She can go up to a lawmaker and say, you want to know what, in my decades plus experience of actually having been in a classroom, this is what we saw. Again, this is what teachers are experiencing today. So she brings more of a fundamental understanding from a classroom perspective, while Ms. Weaver may bring more of a political, a political understanding of how things work in Columbia, for example.
John, it's certainly going to be a race that we're going to closely watch on Tuesday night. Now, the state superintendent race, not the only election that will matter for children's futures. Coming up, we break down a historic school board race with dozens of candidates in Charleston County. We'll be back right after this break. Welcome back to the show. We're also following races for all 9 Charleston County School Board seats. There's a lot to break down. There are more than 30 candidates in these races. Each of those seats represents a single-member district, which is a new system for this election. And John, we want to talk about this because this is really a lot to process. The election's never been held like this for the Charleston County School Board, where you have these single-member districts now. And for voters, they really need to check which district they're in because they're no longer voting for countywide school board. They're only voting for their district representative.
That's right. So again, this may be confusing for a lot of individuals. I go to scvotes.gov. You probably want to check your voter registration, find out what district you're in, and then do some research on the candidates that are running to represent your particular area.
John, we look at the list of candidates in each of these districts. There's only 2 incumbents, Dr. Helen Frazier and Courtney Waters. You look at people like Dr. Carol Temple. You look at Sarah Shad Johnson, Kevin Hollenshed. There's a number of people on here again, obviously the two incumbents, but other ones that have experience in education in the Charleston region, people who have actually been on the board before as well.
So certainly a lot of familiar faces for folks who follow politics in Charleston County, especially for individuals who are concerned about education. A number of qualified people certainly are running. It's telling, though, that only 2 Republicans are now seeking re-election. It really, for individuals who represent or do work on school boards, it really is a labor of love for education. They get, I think, a small per diem. It's like $20 or $30 a meeting, but it really is a full-time job. So kudos to anyone who is running. But these are widely, very important seats. They determine a lot as far as even just tax dollars are concerned in Charleston County, but really what the standard of education is for all of our kids here.
You know, John, we look at this race, a number of groups, organizations have endorsed candidates in this race. It's important if you're voting to kind of maybe understand those organizations that are endorsing certain candidates, right?
Right. So again, if you're sort of confused, again, this is really overwhelming. Again, the first point of perspective would be, let's find out what district I'm in. So if you're in District 1, find out who the candidates are running and then begin to do some research. If you are brand new to some of these issues, organizations like the Education Association of South Carolina, for example, they have put out a slate of endorsed candidates. They've done that statewide as well, too, so even if you're not in Charleston County, Berkeley County, Dorchester County, again, they've got resources where you can offer up some just different perspectives, and they can give some insight on what different campaign platforms might be and what these candidates actually want to do for education.
You know, John, we mentioned this is the first time this election has looked like this for the Charleston County School Board. Can you kind of talk about quickly the change and what this means as the school board now will look different?
Right, so what this basically does, so before you had the entire county voted on representation on the school board, so we didn't have single member districts. It now moves into a specific individual is actually going to represent your area. So for example, if you're in Mount Pleasant, they will have or East Cooper, we should say, you'll have a dedicated representative who's representing the East Cooper interests. So you're no longer voting on all of the candidates throughout the county, but again, individuals who are focused on your specific area.
And John, Berkeley County will do that same thing Tuesday night
right.
on election night. When we come back, we're going to have a rapid fire. We're going to be talking about all the races you need to know about that you may see on your ballot on Tuesday. Welcome back to the show. Now we want to quickly go through rapid fire, number of candidates here in these races locally. Let's start with Senator Tim Scott and Crystal Matthews, Democratic challenger. John, your thoughts real quick.
So again, Tim Scott's very popular. It'll be interesting to see what the vote count looks like in that particular race. If Republicans have a really good night, I wouldn't be surprised to see Senator Tim Scott be the highest ever vote getter in South Carolina history.
John, quickly, let's go to the State House of Representatives. 2 races. We'll start in 110. We have Tom Hartnett and we have Ellis Roberts running for this seat, representing downtown portions of Mount Pleasant across the river. Your thoughts there?
So again, this is an open seat. Again, no incumbent is running. It's a relatively balanced district. It'll be interesting to see if the Democrats can basically pull this one out. That would be an advantage, that would be an addition that they would have in the State House because it's currently occupied by a Republican.
And then we have Spencer Wetmore, current state representative, running against Carol Neal. Your thoughts on that race?
Again, another competitive race. This would be a maintain for the Democrats. Representative Wetmore, again, is a Democrat in the General Assembly. Very competitive race. Make sure you vote. If you live in that particular area, again, it'll be interesting to see if Democrats hold on to that seat.
You know, Congressman Clyburn is up for election in his district as well. That district's a little bit different. Your thoughts on what the congressman could be looking at there?
So he's probably pretty safe. We talk about gerrymandering a lot. It's a real thing. It happens all over the country. This is a district that was really cut for Democrats. All races are competitive. It was Joe Riley. It basically says that you either run scared or you run unopposed. But Congressman Clyburn probably is pretty safe going into Tuesday.
You know, the Charleston County probate judge is up for election. Irv Condon, the longtime judge there, his Judge Curry, who's worked with him closely for the last 20 years, also running for this race. Your thoughts on that one?
So really competitive race in Charleston County, believe it or not. Again, this is one that partisan politics really doesn't have a whole lot of impact on. You'll still get the Republican and Democratic branding. Charleston has been trending Democratic for years. That might give Judge Curry a little bit of an advantage, but again, Judge Condon's been there a long time. The Condon family has been a part of the Charleston community for a long time. Watch that race. Again, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
You know, John, there's about 144 local races or races that we're watching on Election Day here. So the races we've talked about, whether that be governor, the 1st Congressional District, any of these other races, you're one that you're really watching that could be interesting on election night.
So certainly the gubernatorial race, again, will be interesting to see, again, how that plays out. This is the Democrats' latest challenge. to try to really have a new perspective on statewide politics here. If Republicans do really well, Democrats are going to do some really big soul searching on what the future of the party in South Carolina looks like. You've got to remember in politics, if it's within 4 points, it's competitive. 5 to 9, you got beat. Anything outside of 10, I mean, that's just a blowout, and you really need to rethink your strategy moving forward. The local races, again, really interesting. Probate judge is one I'm keeping a pretty keen eye on, and then we'll see what the makeup in the State House looks like.
Kathy Landing is running for a new seat in Mount Pleasant to be a State House representative. Your thoughts on that race?
So again, interesting. Anytime we get anything new, it's always interesting to see what the voters' perspectives are. Anything East Cooper generally trends a little more conservative. So again, that's probably going to favor Republicans. One of the bigger issues, though, if you begin to look at suburban women as a voting bloc, they have a tendency to trend a little more conservative. Abortion. This election season may change that. If they come out and they start supporting Democrats, then that may spell Republicans up and down the ballot.
John, we have about 30 seconds. Any final thoughts voters need to know before we head to break?
So really quickly, if you ever contemplated running for office, get out and do it. Right now, statewide, we've got some offices, for example, like Attorney General, that don't have a challenger opposition. Blank ballots are not good for democracy. So if you're thinking about it, the time to act is now. Please get involved, but more importantly, vote.
John, we're going to be watching so many races on Tuesday night. Stick with us. We'll be right back after this break to wrap up our show. Welcome back to the show. We only have a few moments left together, but want to make sure you're fully ready for Election Day. From the races you'll want to need to know to vote. Now, there are many polling places across the low country. We have a list of them over on our website. That's countont2.com. And remember, if you need a ride to the polls, Carta has you covered with free shuttles. Good news is election night will be bringing up to the minute results as they come in here on News 2. You can join us on Tuesday as we break down the races that matter to you with crews spread across our state and the area. Now, John and I will be here in the studio on the decision desk breaking down those results as they come in. Thank you so much for joining us here on To The Point. This special edition will be back next week for the latest political news. You can catch us every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. Have a great weekend.